The lease agreement sitting on the kitchen table of apartment 4C at the Hargrove Arms had been there for 11 days. Nadia Ose knew this because she had been counting. 11 days of stepping around it, making coffee around it, pretending not to see it while her younger brother Perry sat at the same table eating cereal and pretending the same thing. The number at the bottom of page 3, the new monthly rent, effective 60 days from signature, was not a typo. She had called the management office twice to confirm. It was not a typo. She was 31 years old, a licensed physical therapist, and she could not afford to keep the apartment where her brother had lived for the past 4 years while finishing his undergraduate degree. Their mother had passed 18 months ago. There was no one else. Nadia had picked up a second job 3 weeks ago, not in a clinic, in a hotel. The Alderton Grand sat at the corner of 5th and 57th, a sandstone monument to old money that had somehow survived every economic collapse and cultural shift the city had thrown at it since 1928. The uniform was black and white, the shoes had to be sensible, and the training manual was 47 pages long. She was on page 12 when her supervisor, a compact, humorless woman named Greta, told her she'd be covering the private dining annex on Friday night. Nadia had said yes before she understood what that meant. The annex was not on the hotel floor plan available to regular guests. It was accessed through a service corridor on the 3rd floor, past the linen storage and a locked door marked HVAC that definitely did not contain HVAC equipment. The dining room itself held 1 table, 12 chairs, a chandelier that probably cost more than Nadia's student loans. And tonight, 6 men. She recognized one of them, not personally, but the way you recognize certain weather. A particular color of sky before a tornado, the pressure drop before a storm. His name was Constantine Aldridge. She had seen it once in a headline, buried inside a business supplement her mother used to read on Sunday mornings. Aldridge Holdings acquires 3rd port facility in 18 months. Her mother had clipped it. Men like this, she'd said, tapping the paper. They build things with money that never gets explained. He was younger than she'd expected. Mid-40s maybe, with the kind of stillness that wasn't calm, it was control. Dark suit, no tie, a jaw like something carved rather than grown. He sat at the head of the table, the way a fulcrum sits in the center of a scale. Everything else in the room arranged around him, without effort, without announcement. Nadia poured water, she brought bread. She was furniture. Across from Constantine Aldridge sat a man she did not recognize but immediately disliked. He was heavyset, florid, with a ring on every finger that caught the chandelier light and threw it around the room like a drunk. His name, she would learn later, was Gerald Foss. He spoke with the particular confidence of someone who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered. The acquisition moves forward at close of business Monday, Foss was saying, his voice carrying the texture of gravel being poured into a bucket. Your signature on the transfer docs tonight closes the loop. Constantine Aldridge said nothing. He turned his wineglass slowly on the tablecloth, quarter turn by quarter turn, watching the burgundy catch the light. On his left sat a man named Stuart Elgin. Nadia noticed him the way she noticed a splinter. Small, easily overlooked, producing a disproportionate amount of pain. He was thin, 50s, with the slightly damp look of a man perpetually anxious about something. He was Aldridge's attorney. She deduced this from the leather portfolio in front of him, and the way he kept smoothing the cover of it with his palm, the way people touch worry beads. Stuart Elgin was supposed to be the safest person at the table. He was the one who had prepared the documents. He was the one Constantine Aldridge trusted to read the fine print, so he didn't have to. Nadia was clearing the bread basket from the sideboard when she passed behind Stuart Elgin's chair. The portfolio had fallen slightly open. She was not trying to read it. She was not positioned to read it. But the overhead light was angled precisely wrong, or precisely right, depending on how you looked at it, and a single page was visible through the gap. She had worked 2 summers in her aunt's real estate office during college. She had filed enough contracts to know what an indemnification clause looked like. She had also filed enough contracts to know when one had been surgically altered. The language on the visible page was standard in format and catastrophic in content. A personal guarantee, not corporate, not Aldridge Holdings. Constantine Aldridge, individually and personally, guarantees all outstanding liabilities of the acquired entity, including but not limited to regulatory penalties, environmental remediation costs, and federal fines arising from operations predating the acquisition date. She stopped moving. She stood with the bread basket in both hands and stared at the strip of text visible through the gap in the portfolio and thought, he doesn't know. The acquired entity. She would piece this together later. In pieces, the way you assemble something in the dark, was a logistics company that had been quietly under federal environmental investigation for dumping industrial runoff into the Hudson for the better part of a decade. The liabilities were not speculative. They were real, documented, and conservatively estimated in the hundreds of millions. Gerald Foss knew this. Foss's company had structured the acquisition specifically to transfer those liabilities, wrapped inside a personal guarantee, to a buyer who thought he was purchasing a logistics network. If Constantine Aldridge signed tonight, he would not just be buying a company. He would be absorbing a federal catastrophe with his own name. Stuart Elgin had either missed it or he hadn't. The way his hands were moving on that portfolio cover, Nadia had seen that motion before. Her brother Perry did it with his phone when he was pretending to scroll, but actually just waiting for an anxiety attack to pass. Stuart Elgin wasn't anxious about the dinner. He was anxious about what happened after it. She took the bread basket back to the sideboard. She looked at the door. She thought about Perry's cereal bowl this morning, and the lease agreement on the table, and the rent increase that was not a typo. She thought about walking out. She thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. Then she picked up the water pitcher and walked back to the table. She came around Constantine Aldridge's right side, the way she'd been trained, glass at 10 o'clock, pour from the right. She leaned in to fill his glass. The chandelier was warm above her. She could smell his cologne, cedar and something darker like old libraries. She kept her eyes on the water. "Mr. Aldridge," she said quietly. Not a whisper. The table was talking. Foss was talking. "Before you sign, page 7. It's the personal guarantee clause. It's not standard language." She straightened. She moved to the next glass. Constantine Aldridge did not move. He did not look at her. He did not look at Stuart Elgin. He set down his wine glass with the particular deliberateness of a man deciding something and said, in a voice that carried no agitation whatsoever, "Stuart, I'd like you to read the indemnification language on page 7 aloud, for everyone's benefit." The silence that followed was immediate and architectural. It had walls and a ceiling. Stuart Elgin's hand went still on the portfolio. Gerald Foss stopped mid-sentence, his mouth still slightly open. One of the security men near the door shifted his weight. "Constantine, we've been over the document. It's all standard." "Page 7, Constantine Aldridge said, out loud. Stuart Elgin opened the portfolio. His hands were shaking hard enough that Nadia could see it from the sideboard. He found page 7. He read 4 words and stopped. "I see," Constantine Aldridge said. What happened in the next 90 seconds was something Nadia would later have trouble describing in sequence, because it happened with the speed and total rearrangement of a car accident. Gerald Foss rose from his chair. One of his men moved toward the table. Constantine Aldridge did not reach for anything. He simply said once quietly a single name, "Marco," and 2 men who had been standing along the wall like artwork came alive. Nadia was already moving toward the kitchen. She almost made it. A hand closed around her wrist. Not Foss's men. Foss's men were occupied. It was Constantine Aldridge himself, and his grip was firm without being painful, the grip of someone who had made a precise calculation about how much force was appropriate. "Not that way," he said. His eyes were the color of deep water, where it gets dark. "They have men in the service corridor. Come with me." "I am not part of this," Nadia said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by that. "You became part of it approximately 40 seconds ago." He released her wrist. "I'm not going to make you do anything. But if you walk out that service door, you'll walk directly into Gerald Foss's second problem of the evening, which is making sure no one who was in this room tonight remembers being here." Behind them, the room had ceased to be a dining room. Nadia went with him. There was a car. Of course there was a car. Black, nondescript, already running at the curb of the hotel's secondary exit. The driver, a woman in her 60s with a silver braid down her back, didn't turn around when they got in. She just said, "East or the bridge." "Bridge," Constantine said. They were on the Queensboro before Nadia fully processed that she was in a moving vehicle with a man whose name she'd seen in a newspaper clipping her dead mother had saved, heading away from the hotel where she had been working a second job to avoid being evicted. "My brother doesn't know where I am," she said. "You can call him when we get to the house." Constantine was looking out the window. "Not from your phone. The SIM is already flagged. How do you know that? Because Gerald Foss is thorough. And because you spoke to me in front of his attorney." Nadia looked at her hands in her lap. She had a small cut on her palm from the breadbasket. She must have gripped it too hard without noticing. "What's the house?" "Somewhere safe. That's not an answer." He looked at her then, for the first time directly. "No," he said. "It isn't. I'll give you a better one when I have it." The house was in Connecticut, 40 minutes past the bridge, down a 2-lane road that wound through stands of old hardwood, and then up a long drive to a property that was less a house than a compound. Low and sprawling, cedar and glass, tucked into a hillside like it had grown there. The lights came on as the car approached. Not motion sensors. Someone inside. The someone was a man named Ellis, who looked like a retired Marine and was in fact a retired Marine, who opened the door, looked at Nadia with an expression of professional neutrality, and said only, "Kitchen stocked. I'll sweep the perimeter." The interior was warm and austere. Nothing decorative except one framed photograph on the mantel. A younger Constantine, with a woman who had his same stillness, his same dark eyes. His mother, Nadia guessed. Both of them looking at the camera with the particular expression of people who have learned not to look surprised by anything. Constantine poured 2 glasses of water from a filtered tap. He set one in front of Nadia at the kitchen island and sat across from her. "Tell me how you knew," he said. Nadia wrapped her hands around the glass. "I worked in a real estate office. I've filed contracts. I know what a personal guarantee looks like when it's been changed from a corporate one." The font kerning was different on that paragraph. Small but different. Constantine watched her. "You're not a career waitress. I'm a physical therapist. I'm covering a second shift to make rent." She met his eyes. "Your turn. What was the Foss acquisition, actually?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "A logistics firm called Meridian Transit. I've been trying to acquire them legitimately for 2 years. They control the last independent cold chain network on the eastern seaboard. My company needs it to complete our supply chain." A pause. "What I apparently did not know, until 40 seconds ago, is that Meridian Transit has been the subject of a sealed federal environmental investigation since 2019. Foss bought them out of bankruptcy last year. He's been trying to offload the liability ever since, and your attorney helped him do it." Constantine's jaw tightened, just slightly. "Stuart has been with me for 11 years. His hands were shaking before you even opened the documents," Nadia said. "He knew what was in there. Yes, the word came out flat and final. He did." Nadia thought about something. "He'll tell Foss everything. Tonight. Whatever he knows about your operations, your assets. If he's already been turned, this was the beginning, not the end." The stillness that came over Constantine Aldridge in that moment was different from his table stillness. It was the stillness of something calculating very fast behind a very controlled face. "Yes," he said again, "which means my accounts will likely be frozen by morning and anyone connected to me becomes a target. Then we have tonight." He looked at her. "We." Nadia had not meant to say that. She was aware of it the moment it left her mouth. But she didn't retract it either, because here was the thing she had not said and was not going to say. 5 years ago, her father had been a subcontractor. He'd been hired by a shell company that dissolved 6 months into the job. The liability for a structural violation, a violation that was not his fault, that he had flagged in writing, had transferred to him when the shell company evaporated. He had spent 3 years in litigation. He had died of a heart attack 2 years ago, at 61, with a judgment still pending against his estate. She had recognized the clause because she had seen what one could do. She didn't tell Constantine this, not yet. "You know contracts," she said instead. "I know contracts. Stuart Elgin knows where Foss built his structure, and so does Foss himself. If there's a way to reverse this legally, to expose the acquisition fraud before any documents are filed, it has to happen before Monday's close. That's 60 hours. Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet outside. Through the glass wall, the Connecticut woods were absolutely dark. "What do you need?" he said. "Every document you have on Meridian Transit and access to a legal database." He stood and went to a laptop on the counter. He slid it toward her. "Westlaw credentials are saved. The Meridian files are on the drive, encrypted. Password is my mother's birthday, July 9th, 1948. Nadia looked at him. "You're trusting me with that. You trusted me with your life in the hallway of that hotel." His voice was even. It seemed like the appropriate exchange. She opened the laptop. She didn't sleep. Constantine left her to work and came back at 2 in the morning with coffee and a plate of toast, which he set down without comment. He sat across from her and read through physical documents Ellis brought from a safe somewhere in the house. The only sounds were the wind off the ridge and the occasional creak of the structure and the tapping of her fingers on the keys. At 3:47 in the morning, she found it, Aldridge. She'd shifted to his last name sometime around midnight without noticing. He looked up. Meridian Transit's last legitimate operator, before Foss's bankruptcy acquisition, was a holding company called Sable Creek Partners. Sable Creek Partners still exists. It was never properly dissolved because Foss's team filed the bankruptcy in Delaware, but Sable Creek was registered in Connecticut, and the Connecticut dissolution paperwork was never completed. He set down his papers. Meaning Foss's acquisition of Meridian Transit is legally incomplete. He acquired the operating entity but not the parent. Sable Creek still holds a reversionary interest in Meridian's real property assets. She turned the screen toward him. If we file a claim against that reversionary interest tonight, it creates a legal cloud on the title that makes the acquisitions impossible to complete by Monday's close. Foss can't offload the liability without clear title. The whole deal stalls. Constantine stared at the screen. He stood up and came around the island to look over her shoulder. She was aware of him the way you're aware of weather. Not unpleasant, just present, with a kind of atmospheric weight. "Can you draft the filing?" he said. "I haven't passed the bar. I'm not asking you to represent me in court. I'm asking you to draft a document." She looked at the screen. "Yes," she said. "I can draft it." She drafted it in 2 hours. Constantine read every line, slowly, with the attention of someone who had learned, recently and painfully, that he should read every line. He made 2 changes. He signed it. Ellis drove it to a Connecticut filing clerk's home at 6 in the morning, with an envelope whose contents Nadia chose not to ask about. At 6:43, her phone Ellis had sourced a clean burner rang. Perry's voice came through scratchy and anxious and dear. "Nadia, where are you? I got home and you weren't." "I'm okay," she said. She stepped outside onto the cedar deck, into the cold morning air, the woods pale and blue-gray in the early light. "I'm in Connecticut. I'll explain everything when I get back." A pause. "Perry, are you feeding the cat?" "Obviously I'm feeding the cat." "Nadia, what is happening?" "I'll tell you everything, I promise. Feed Biscuit and stay home today." She hung up and stood there for a moment with the cold on her face and the smell of pine and wet earth. She heard the sliding door open behind her. "Family?" Constantine said. "Brother, he's 22, and she looked out at the tree line. "Our parents are both gone, it's just us." A beat. "He has a cat named Biscuit who requires morning wet food and exactly 1 chin scratch, or he complains." "The brother or the cat?" She almost smiled. "The cat." Though honestly, Constantine came to stand beside her at the railing. Not close, just present. In the thin morning light he looked different, less architectural, more like a person. The control was still there, but it had relaxed slightly, the way a fist relaxes when the immediate threat passes. "The filing will hold?" she asked. "My Connecticut counsel confirms it. Foss's team won't see it until the title search Monday morning. By then the cloud on title will be a matter of public record. And Stewart," the muscle in his jaw moved, "Stewart will cooperate with federal investigators. I'll make sure of that." "How?" "Because Stewart Elgin is not a criminal. He's a frightened man who made a catastrophic choice under pressure. Foss has something on him. When Foss loses his leverage, which he will when the deal collapses, Stewart will fall apart. I'll be there when he does." A pause. "And I'll have a federal contact waiting." Nadia nodded slowly. "Foss will know you're still standing. Yes, he'll come at you again." "Almost certainly." Constantine looked at her. "Which is why I need someone who reads the fine print." She turned to look at him. The morning was getting lighter by degrees, the sky going from grey to pale gold in the east. "I told you I haven't passed the bar. I know. I looked you up at 4 in the morning." He said it without apology. "Nadia Osei, Columbia Law, 3rd year, left to care for a parent. Clean record. Licensed PT in New York. Currently employed at the Alderton Grand Hotel, where as of last night you've been let go, because the events of this evening will have been reported by Foss's contact in hotel management." She stared at him. "I've been fired." "Yes," she breathed out. "Okay." The word came out smaller than she intended. "The bar exam is administered in February and July," Constantine said. "My foundation has funded 3 bar prep programs. I have attorneys who will supervise your study. If you want to sit for February, that's 5 months. Yes, you're offering me a job. I'm offering you a position. There's a difference." He looked out at the woods. "I need someone inside the legal function of Aldridge Holdings who does not have 11 years of debt to Gerald Foss or anyone like him. I need someone who will read every page of every document before it gets to my desk." He paused. "And someone who is not afraid to tell me things I don't want to hear in rooms where telling me might get them killed." "That's a terrible job description," Nadia said. "The compensation is excellent." She looked at her hands, at the small cut on her palm from the bread basket. "My brother needs 1 more year to finish his degree. I need an apartment that isn't on a month-to-month notice. Both of those are solvable problems," Constantine said. "Not with arrogance. With the tone of someone who has a list and intends to work through it." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. Neither of them said anything about the night in the kitchen, or the hours side by side over documents, or the particular intimacy of reading contracts with someone at 4 in the morning while the world they both inhabited rearranged itself. Some things don't need to be acknowledged to be understood. "I want it in writing," Nadia said. "The terms, everything. I will read every word." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, too controlled for that, but close. "I would expect nothing less." 8 months later, Nadia Osei passed the New York bar exam on her first attempt. She found out on a Tuesday afternoon. standing in the elevator of the Aldridge Holdings building on 53rd Street, checking her email on her phone. She made a sound she would later describe to Perry as extremely undignified and pressed the button for the 34th floor. Constantine was in his office when she walked in without knocking, which she had earned the right to do approximately 4 months ago. He was on the phone. He looked at her face and ended the call mid-sentence. "Results?" he said. She held up her phone. He stood up. He came around his desk. The same deliberateness, the same controlled movement, the same man she had first seen from the corner of a private dining room through the particular terror of recognizing something wrong. He took her phone and looked at the screen. He handed it back. "Congratulations, counselor," he said. "I want that corner office," she said. "The one with the view of the park. It's occupied. Unoccupy it." He looked at her for a moment. "Done," he said. Later that evening, Perry picked up Indian takeout and brought it to the apartment. The new apartment. The one with the second bedroom that Perry used as a studio. The one where the lease was signed and the rent was not a typo. Biscuit sat on the kitchen counter and watched them eat with the proprietary contempt of a cat who had survived a period of uncertainty and emerged with opinions. "So," Perry said, loading his plate. "The bar thing. That means you're officially a lawyer now. It means I passed an exam. Are you going to be one of those lawyers who's always working?" "I'm already one of those people." She stole a piece of his naan. "The job is good, Perry." He looked at her over his food. He was 22 and looked like their father around the eyes and their mother around the mouth, and entirely like himself everywhere else. "Are you happy?" She thought about it. She thought about a private dining room and a water pitcher and a strip of text visible through a gap in a leather portfolio. She thought about Connecticut at dawn, cold air, pine trees, a man who read every line she wrote and changed 2 things and trusted her with his mother's birthday. "Yeah," she said. "I think I actually am." Biscuit jumped off the counter and walked across Perry's lap without acknowledgement, which meant dinner was over. The next morning, she arrived at the office before anyone else and made coffee and opened the first document in the queue, a new acquisition, a logistics firm on the Gulf Coast, 87 pages of standard language that she would read, every single word, before it went anywhere near a signature line. That was the job. That was the point. She turned to page 1 and started reading.